what do you define as a highly successful person?
I don't think you have to be kind of quote unquote like objectively successful. I would at least in the way that it relates to this episode, I think it would be better to kind of define it as people who are just on that path. You can just kind of look at their life and look at how they carry themselves, what they're doing, and you can see that they're on the path to having a better life. I don't think we have to, put an objective label on it as like they make a certain amount of money a year, or they have this many businesses, or like this, that, and the other. It's people who are on that path to doing whatever it looks like for them, because success does look different for everyone. Because, like for me, like success is just financial freedom and the ability to take care of all of my loved ones, right? So it looks different for everyone, but I think to make it kind of like a blanket statement or term, I think you just have to look at the person's life and see that they're on the path to achieving whatever that success looks like. I know that kind of is a little ambiguous, but it's kind of like the best way I can think about it, instead of just, trying to put some sort of like objective marker on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that different people in different states are going to define it differently. So like someone in the beginning is going to, I think that we could be labeled as successful people in someone's eyes.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Also, we label people way ahead of us as successful.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to move the goalpost in some way. But I think, just overall, again, these are, habits and mindsets and frameworks that just kind of get you on the right path. And they're just commonalities that, at least that I've noticed in other people, and also, these are also things that I very much use myself. Truthfully, I pulled almost all of these. If I'm looking at the list, I think all of these I pulled from myself specifically. I do all of these things regularly, every single day. And they're just kind of like the commonalities, habits, mindsets, just all that stuff that I use regularly. And from the people that I know and thinking about, they definitely also use these regularly. I want to know what you think about this. I actually kind of hate the word habit because I feel like it's kind of been, I don't know if like overused is the term, but I definitely feel like people have kind of ruined the weight behind it in a way because of the wave of like finance bro guru, those type people, like the Tai Lopez's of the world and stuff. Like they took it so far with the whole like mindset thing and the habits thing and the hyper self-optimization stuff that it, like I hear like habit, like honestly, like if I heard the title of this episode, even 6 months ago, I would have like flinched because it just feels so, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but of that ilk. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like those people and stuff, like they just overdid it with all of that it just, yeah, it doesn't sound great in my head anymore. And it's unfortunate because I do think habits and mindsets are very important when it comes to, being onto the path of success. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that habits they could have gotten a bad rap, and I don't think that you necessarily have to look at it that way. Like, sure, they're habits, but it's just like, basically what we're saying is, what does it take? What characteristics?
Yeah.
You can reframe it, but at the end of the day, like, habits are what make you who you are. Yeah. It's what you do each day that defines who you're going to be in the future. So I think that, yeah, habits might have a bad rap, but we kind of have to
define it as that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, won't we hop on into the first one? I'll let you go first.
Before that, I also just want to set a clear expectation that this list that we're going to go over, we both came up with 5. And because of that, we're not saying that these are the 10 habits that make someone successful, but rather these are 10 habits of a successful person.
Yeah, this is not like an all-encompassing list, and this is not something that, if you don't have like all 10 of these, you're also going to fail. Like these are just commonalities that we've seen over the years that we think are really important and can be very useful.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with one that I think is very simple, and it's about much more than just this action, but making your bed in the morning.
Oh, I was waiting for this one because I think it's the dumbest thing ever.
Okay.
Tell me first. Tell me why.
I am the type of person that if I don't win the morning, I tend to lose the rest of the day.
I do agree with that.
And a made bed is such a simple task. And it's not like you're missing out on anything by taking those 20, 30 seconds to do it. But I think that you gain a lot mentally by having that like first win of the day within like the first 2 minutes of being awake. Otherwise, like you can't get a win until you sit down at your computer or whatever it is. Like for me, like I go to the bathroom and then like brush my teeth, all these things. It's like 15 minutes before I could even get another win instead of just winning first thing.
I totally get that. And, framing it as it's not the action itself, it's the getting a win early in the day and controlling your morning. Like I totally get that. And I do the same thing, like I have to take my morning walk every morning when I can. So that kind of takes like that similar place. I've always hated the make your bed specifically because it's been something that always just made no sense to me. Because I'm just the person, you're going to get right back into it. Like you're going to make it just to then turn around and get right back into the bed. Like obviously don't leave it a rag. Like be just like clean as a whole. But
Do you think there's something to be said though about, I know that there's people out there that whether it's made or not would determine their willingness to get back in bed when they're not supposed to.
yeah, but I feel like that's just
I think that we're talking like my approach to a lot of these things is like set your environment up for success. So like you could relate this to diet, and you set yourself up for success when you go grocery shopping. You can't expect yourself to avoid all of the bad foods that are in your home, but instead don't bring them in.
Sure.
It's the same thing with making your bed, because I know that if there were days where I just wasn't feeling it and I came back to the apartment at 2 p.m. and I saw an unmade bed and I'd be like, dang.
But see, like I'm not that person because I also can't get into my bed unless I'm clean. Like I'm not getting into my bed unless like I've showered recently. So I'm never getting in my bed to begin with. But also I feel like that's just like such a trivial problem. Like you're having to fight the urge to get back into your bed. Like I feel like that's such a trivial thing. I don't know. Yeah, the bed thing, because I feel that's something that a lot of people have said over the years, and I've just always been like super hesitant to it. But I get the merit behind it of win your mornings, take control of the morning. It's the little things over and over throughout the morning that allow you to set the rest of your day up for success. But at the end of the day, you're just going to get right back into it. So it's the bed specifically that I've always been hesitant to.
What would be, I know you said like your morning walk, but maybe for some people like that's not necessarily an option. Like what else do you think that they would be able to win at in the morning?
I think the first thing is just like not get on your phone. And that's probably like the most important thing. Like if we want to talk about like morning habits here, like the first thing that I would say is not get on your phone. And I say that as someone who still struggles with this daily. But if you can spend the first hour of your morning without your phone, not checking your phone, I think that's a huge win. And I would count that as a huge win day to day. Your phone just like completely wrecks your brain mentally in terms from like a dopamine response perspective. Like I definitely 100% see a difference in my days when I start my day with my phone and when I don't, in terms of like my ability to be distracted, my ability to like doom scroll, my ability to, just kind of you just kind of like naturally pick your phone up without thinking, just like the brainless, just pick up your phone, start scrolling, like all of that. the difference between the days in which I don't pick up my phone first thing in the morning and the days that I do are like night and day in terms of those things. That would be like the number one.
Do you think that there's merit to replacing that dopamine hit from your phone with a task like making your bed?
Sure. I I think my also like my hesitancy to the making the bed thing is that again it's just been like a lot of people have preached that for years and they acted like that was the only thing. And I think people also kind of used it as like a virtue signal in the past of, oh, I'm this hyper disciplined person because I make my bed every morning. And it's like, no.
But would you agree that overarching, if you looked at it from a bird's eye view, that people that make their bed are more generally successful than people that don't?
No, I don't know if there's a correlation there. I mean, there's probably plenty of people out there who have been hyper successful, have never made their bed. I never made my bed until I got married, truthfully, ever. Because again, I mean, the closest thing I would do to make my bed is I would get out of the bed and I would just, just pull the sheet back over, like the duvet cover, whatever, back over, just because I didn't want it to just be like crumpled up in a mess. But so again, I understand like the action of controlling your morning, having a task, getting a win, and all of those things. I don't know why people hyperfixate on specifically making the bed. I feel like people, take it too far because again, it's not about the bed. It's about controlling your morning, right? But people have in the past, at least that I've seen, have made it about the bed. And that makes no sense to me. But I get the merit behind it.
Okay. What's your first habit for successful people?
I would say they label their seasons. And what I mean by that is they, something that gets thrown around a lot is work-life balance. Everyone loves to throw that around. Work-life balance, you got to find the balance, can't have too much without the other. And I like Hormozy's take on this, where he talks about how there is no real balance and there's no way to have good balance in your life. It's always going to lean one way or the other pretty heavily. And that has been very true for my life, at least, and still to this day, I don't know if there is a way to have like true balance. I do think that people underestimate their ability to get things done in a reasonable amount of time. We were kind of talking about that the other day, is that I do think people underestimate their ability to give 100% and get enough work done without working the whole 16 hours a day. But also at the same time, I also don't think that you can get away with just working 5 hours a day and having this fantastic, wonderful 100% connection with your spouse and be there for your kids 100% of the time and all that stuff while simultaneously trying to build something. That makes sense. So something that I feel like I've done a pretty good job of over the years is what I call labeling the seasons. So understanding where I'm at currently and being able to go, okay, for the next 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, however long the season is, like this is grind time. I got to get stuff done. This is, by the time this 4 months is up, I need to be at this place in my life. I need to be at this place in my business. I need to have been able to have accomplished these certain goals, tasks, milestones. And you being able to seamlessly switch between that and then also a completely different season. So earlier this year, I definitely took more of a rest season. I spent time, me and my wife, we went on a really nice vacation. Something that I don't do a very good job of in particular is just vacation specifically and just taking time away from work. But being able to identify that, okay, I'm no longer in this season of grind. I'm now in a season of either reconnection with my spouse or rest or recalibration, and there's so many other ways to label those seasons. There's plenty of other things that you can be doing during a period of time. You can make it even more niche and be like, okay, this is my season of marketing. You know, this is my 3 months of I'm going to go really, really hard on marketing and getting my business in front of as many eyes as possible. This is my season of financial literacy and making sure that my finances are extremely dialed. You know, there's so many different ways you can do it, but having enough self-awareness, and we're going to talk about self-awareness in a second, but the ability to switch between those seasons seamlessly without getting stuck in one, you know, because something I felt guilty to early in life was just labeling everything as grind season, right? Just the entire year was work, 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 and not being able to be like, okay, like I've done this, I've achieved those things. Actually, what's probably best is for me to take a step away, check in with the people that I love and the people that my life impact, make sure that they're good, make sure that we're good, and then go into a different season there.
As someone, I mean, we both are this way, but kind of like work addicts in
Yeah.
a sense. Do you, I mean, I know that you said like the beginning of this year was that season for you where you slowed down a little bit, but do you think that you got enough of that? Do you think that you got back into a grind season too quickly? How do you figure those things out?
Well, I mean, if you ask my wife, she'll say it wasn't long enough. But I mean, like, that'll always be the answer. Um, I mean, I think you have to just check yourself. You have to, you know, you have to be honest with yourself, and then you also have to check yourself with, again, the people that your life impact and see what they think. Was it too short? Was it too long? Too longer? You know, I think, at least for myself, it's got to be long enough that I'm excited to get back to work. You know, because there's a difference between like itching to get back to work and excited to get back to work. You know, itching to get back to work is more so kind of like the anxious response of, oh, I haven't done anything in a while. You know, you have emails sitting in your inbox. You know that you have contracts that you have to send out. You know, you have things to do, and you kind of have this anxious response of, oh, like I need to get back to the office. Like I need to get this stuff done. But on the other side of that, you get excited to go back to work. You get excited to come to the studio, be with the boys, get work done, work on new things, because, you know, on the other side of that anxious response as well, you get to start to actually kind of think about what you want to do and kind of dream a little bit about your business and what you want to achieve in the next 6 months to a year. And once those ideas start flowing, that's when you start to get excited for the work. And that's kind of like my barometer for when I know it's time to get back to work, is when I, you know, actually am excited to come back.
Do you think that it's possible to ever, especially later in life, actually get out of the grind phase?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult, especially for people like us who are definitely more inclined to continue to work. But I definitely think it's possible. It just requires self-awareness. You just have to be real with yourself. And, you know, I love that story of Dan Martell. He said he was like mentoring this lady, and he asked her like what she wanted to do like with her business, and she said she wanted to exit at 100 million. And he was like, why 100 million? And she was like, well, I want to be able to tell all the people who didn't believe in me, like, you know, basically screw you. You know, I'm a woman. I built $100 million company, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, well, how much do you do right now? And she's like, I'm doing like 8 million a year or something like that. And he goes like, well, what are you waiting for? Like, this is your moment to say screw you if you want to. You know, the percentage of women who built multi-million-dollar businesses is very, very few. What are you waiting for? So you'll probably have that moment in your life at some point. So like in that moment, you just have to be really honest with yourself and realize, okay, like, oh, I've actually done the thing. Like I think you can't lose sight of what the work is for. I think people forget that we're doing the work for a reason, not just to do the work. You know, I'm not working as much as I do just to do it. I'm doing it for a specific reason, is to further my life in a way in which I want my life to be. And just taking a step back every once in a while, look around and see where your life is, compare it to where you wanted it to be. And then if it lines up, then you did it. But again, just requires a lot of self-awareness.
When Chris Williamson talks about type A people with type B problems and type B people with type A problems, do you think that, because I'm trying to figure this out for myself too, like we talk about seasons and identifying seasons and labeling them, and I had actually never heard that concept until I moved here. And I feel like since I moved here, it's just always been a grind phase. And so I'm curious if you think the season approach of like having a proper season of rest is the right way to do it, or rather find moments throughout to rest. Just you can still be in a grind phase, but not necessarily committing every hour of every day to grinding.
Yeah, I mean, I think people hear season and think that it's got to be the length of an actual season. Like they think that you have to spend all summer resting or spend all fall grinding or whatever. They don't have to be these like super extended periods of time. You can do 6, 8, 10 weeks of serious work and then take 2 days to rest, recalibrate, and kind of look around, see where you are, and then get right back to work. I don't think they need to be these like super long periods of time, but at the same time, I do think that having whatever time you allow yourself, having a specifically dedicated time where you're not doing anything else other than resting, thinking, etc., having that dedicated time to actually think. We talk a lot about the refinement process and all of this business, life, self-improvement, all of this is a refinement process. You have to have a goal. You got to look towards that goal. You got to put your head down and start working towards that goal. And then every once in a while, you need to stop, take a step back, look around, look where you originally aimed for, see how close you are, see where you've strayed away, refine, recalibrate, put your head back down, keep working towards it. And I think you can only really do that when you allow yourself to actually stop. I think if you make the period too short, like if you're saying, you're in a grind season and you take 2 hours out of your day to quote unquote recalibrate, like I don't think that's actually doing what you need it to do. So it doesn't have to be months at a time, but it also doesn't need to be hours at a time. I think you need to take an actual dedicated space of time. At minimum, I would say a few days, and then kind of feel it out from there.
I think that that's a good segue into our next habit, which we already brought up a little bit, but self-awareness. I know what I think of when I think of self-awareness in this light, but in what way are you applying that in your mind?
Well, because I wrote down, I know we both kind of wrote down self-awareness. I wrote down specifically the habit of talking to yourself, something I do a ton. Dog, if I had a camera that followed me, people would think I have schizophrenia or something with the amount that I talk to myself. Like, especially when I'm in the car, I talk to myself constantly, out loud too. I think, a lot of this comes from my deep fear of trying not to be a narcissist. I've talked about this before. Terrified of it. It's something that I'm constantly checking myself because I'm very aware of the fact that I come across as very matter of fact, especially when I communicate. And some people interpret it as that, and I'm terrified of that, truthfully. So that's where a lot of it comes from or stems from. But self-awareness is really just the ability to objectively take a step away from yourself and being able to remove as much personal bias as possible and be able to think through what you're thinking and what you're saying and what you're doing and objectively measure if it's good or not and if it's correct or not. There's plenty of times I'm literally in the car driving and I have a thought about something and I will play devil's advocate with myself and I will stress test the thought, the argument. That's probably another reason why I probably come off very matter of fact is because I've already stress tested the argument. I've already tried to poke as many holes as possible in whatever I'm saying before I even say it out loud. And I think that's super important to be able to recognize what personal biases you already have and be able to stress test whatever you're thinking or whatever you're doing to make sure that what you're doing is correct. And then also being able, because I think this goes hand in hand with self-awareness, is the ability to take criticism. You know, yeah, like it's great and all to have the ability to objectively look at yourself, but you still need to check yourself with other people. I've told you plenty of times, like, please, for the love of all things good, tell me if I'm doing something wrong, and I'll ask you, like, what can I be doing better? What do you have a problem with me? Like, am I doing something wrong? Or I'll say, hey, Cyrus, like, I'm just checking myself here. Like, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? I think both of those kind of go hand in hand. What do you think?
I think that self-awareness for someone like me is a tough line between self-awareness and just overthinking.
Yeah.
And like I tend to I like what you said at the end there because it kind of like provides a different route for someone like me where I don't know if thoughts by myself are the best idea
Yeah.
because it leads to me just like over intellectualizing everything. And but I do find, which it's funny because it's not necessarily self-awareness then, but rather surrounding yourself with people that you trust and getting their opinion
Yeah.
on things and having them like check you in a sense. And that also means you have to surround yourself with people that are willing to tell you when you're wrong.
Which is, I think it's very hard to find those people, and like people who are actually willing to really tell you. Like, what did I tell you yesterday? I said, I need you to talk to me like if you were talking behind my back. I need you to be as brutally honest as possible, because that's the only way. If that's the only way you can really figure out where you're at, is if you have people who can be fully transparent and not afraid to be hypercritical of you. Um, yeah, it's very paramount to what you're doing, because if you're not operating off of correct feedback, then you could just completely stray away from whatever you're trying to achieve.
So to apply self-awareness in a little bit more of a niche way, when I was thinking of it this morning and writing this down, I was thinking about more inside of your business in terms of growth, scaling. You have to be able to identify your strengths and weaknesses as a business owner, or you can apply it to life too as an individual. But in business, you have the opportunity to outsource to people that are better than you at things. And that's a really hard pill to swallow when you've been the person to do everything, especially when you come to only trust yourself and then you have to let go of things and admit when you're not the best at certain things. But yeah, I think applying that to business will severely impact, especially how long it takes to find success.
Yeah, I business is so incredibly hard when it comes to self-awareness, because again, you got to be able to objectively take a step away from yourself and realize what are my actual weaknesses. And that's a very hard thing to do, especially when you've always done everything yourself. And regardless of if you're good or bad at the thing, it's gotten you this far. And it's very easy to be like, well, I've gotten myself this far, I must not be that bad at it. But being able to also go, but if I got someone who was even better at that thing, like, how far along would my business be? Yeah, so being able to outsource your weaknesses, huge. And I would say a must, really. Like, if you can't outsource your weaknesses, and you can't outsource your weaknesses correctly, like, don't outsource the thing that you just are tired of doing, or outsource the thing that actually isn't necessary. Actually outsourcing your specifically weaknesses, and your business will be so much better for it.
Okay, so moving forward, what do you think is the next habit?
This is something I'm super passionate about, and this is something that we've talked about a lot, but it's they outsource their purpose. I I believe that purpose is best served when it's outsourced. And what I mean by that is I kind of break purpose down into two categories. You have self-sourced purpose and you have outsourced purpose. So self-sourced purpose would be any sort of meaning or purpose in your life that's derived from yourself. So if you have a personal goal of running a marathon, or Cyrus is doing a bodybuilding show right now. Whatever the task in your life is that directly and only benefits yourself, that would be what I could categorize as self-sourced purpose. And I think it definitely has its time or place. I'm not trying to villainize self-sourced purpose. It definitely has a role in your life, and I definitely think they can be very useful. But I think when it comes to the overarching game that is life, I think life is best served when you have outsourced your purpose to something bigger than yourself and something outside of yourself. Because I think one of the traps of having self-sourced purpose is that you have to do the thing, and then you also have to be the person who decides when the thing is done. And I think that requires so much self-awareness that very few people can actually do that well. You know, say for example, we hear this all the time, coming from the fitness bodybuilding space. We hear so many stories about people who set this goal of losing weight, getting in shape, getting a six pack. And then they go and they go and they go and they can't stop. They can't tell themselves, okay, like I did the thing. I got the six pack, One of the people that we followed the other day, he put out an Instagram post and he talked about how he literally trained his way into an eating disorder because he had rewired his brain into hunger being a positive emotion, and he just took it way too far. And I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into because they self-source their purpose and they couldn't do the thing and also be the arbiter of when the thing is done. Versus when you outsource your purpose, you have other people who get to tell you when the thing is done, and you can stop and take the win and then also be able to move on to the next thing. Because that's the other problem, is that if you never stop the thing that you were doing previously, you can never move on to the next thing. And then you end up living a kind of an uneventful life in a way because you were stuck on this one thing. That makes sense?
Yeah. So what does outsourced purpose look like in your life?
Well, for me, I spoke about this on a previous episode, but I'm very much a caretaker in my life. My utmost priority in life is taking care of the people I love. My family, my spouse, like those are the people that mean everything to me, and my friends included. Those people mean everything to me, and without those people, I would live a very unfulfilled life, truthfully, and I only care about taking care of them. If they're good, I'm good. So all of my purpose in life, business, even the reason why I take care of myself. Some people might have an argument against this, but it works for me in a sense that even the way that I take care of myself, I do it for the people around me because I understand that if I'm not personally good, physically, mentally, from a health perspective, then they're also not good because I also can't take care of them if I'm not good. So all of my purpose is positioned on the people that I love. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, family and friends and loved ones. Like it can be charity work. It can be, a specific, issue in life, something that we talk about a lot and something that we hope that this podcast helps is, kind of the men's mental health crisis right now. We're losing so many men a year. Male loneliness is at an all-time high. Male suicide rates are skyrocketing. It's not a great time right now to be a man, truthfully, at least from a mental perspective. And that's something that we hope that this podcast can help in some way, is help those people and kind of help bring that to the forefront and help stimulate conversations around that. It can look like so many things, but at the end of the day, I feel like life is best spent when ultimately whatever you're working towards and the overarching theme of your life was to do something bigger than yourself.
Do you think that there's a course of action to rewiring for someone that isn't wired that way? For someone that's always been doing things for themselves and doesn't have people in their life that they are doing things for?
Well, yeah, if you, there's definitely niche scenarios out there where people didn't really grow up with a family or didn't grow up with good friends or something like that. And that's when I would say just like find something that's bigger than yourself, a charity movement, a social issue, whatever the case may be. And I think for a lot of people who struggle with this, they've just like never given it a chance, right? They've never actually gone out and tried to do something bigger than themselves. They've never tried to actually make an impact in any other area of life. So you actually just have to give it a chance, right? I'm interested to hear your thoughts though, because you are someone, especially like I said, bodybuilding is very much like a self-source purpose. How have you navigated that? And have you found any sort of like fulfillment issues in that? Because, you work. And that's probably like another thing is that outsourced purpose could be never ending. It can be this, infinite pool of purpose. I can always take care of the people I love until the day I die. Versus self-source purpose can almost be like a very finite resource. You've worked really hard for this bodybuilding show for the last, 6, 8, 10 months. Once your show hits in June, you're done. Like, how are you navigating that mentally? Does that mess you up at all that you've done all this work and now the thing is going to be done?
It it doesn't mess with me, but to address this topic as a whole, am I think that I am someone that is a lot less like naturally giving in a sense than maybe you are. And I do think that growing up, I kind of put this chip on my shoulder, like I need to do this for myself. And I do find, it's hard. Like all of the physical goals that I have for myself, I feel like I always have to have one. And maybe that's this struggle of trying to like prove self-worth in a sense in these physical feats. But I do struggle with not having a feedback loop of like someone that actually requires my care. And being in this season of I'm working a lot. I'm working much more than I need to for myself, but I'm also not in a position to like take care of someone. So I, in that sense, like with work, I try to tell myself that this is for the future type thing and that the work now will then provide for those people in the future. But it definitely is hard to draw that line when it's not doing that right now. And I do see a world where I can see how people end up just self-sourcing purpose. So,
And I think, and again, I don't want to villainize self-source purpose. Like, there's definitely a time and place for it. It's definitely something that I would recommend when you are first starting out. If you want to make a change in your life and you want to be better, you want your life to be different than what it currently is. It's been controversial in the past, but, a rule that I actually kind of liked was, and this is kind of the only thing I really agreed with Andrew Tate, but Andrew Tate's rule of get a six pack. He said, if you come to me anxious and depressed and you hate your life, go get a six pack. And after you get a six pack, then come talk to me. And I think the merit behind that is not the six pack itself. What it is that it's able to install some sort of purpose in your life. I feel as if probably all people who want to make a change in their life probably lack some sort of purpose, right? If not all purpose. And one of the benefits of self-sourced purpose is the fact that you can quickly attain it. It's hard to find a purpose in life that you want to dedicate your life to, from an outsourced perspective. It's hard to find whatever movement or problem or conflict that you want to try to resolve and dedicate your life to. Like, that's hard. That's a large commitment. So it's much quicker and easier to find some sort of self-sourced reason to keep going and do certain things. So like getting a six pack is a super easy one. You immediately know the goal. You know what that looks like. You can start day one. You can start immediately, and you can start seeing results very quickly. If you've been eating unhealthy and then you immediately get into a calorie deficit, you're going to very quickly see some results. You're going to drop a lot of water weight. You'll see the scale go down. So I like the merit behind that. because it allows you to have some sort of purpose in your life quickly, and it allows you to just start. And then as you get good at that and that becomes easier for you, you then can start making that transition to kind of outsource purpose. So I definitely think there's a time and place for it, but ultimately I think life is best spent when you are using your life to a something that's bigger than yourself.
And to reinforce that, like I said, being in more of a position where everything has almost had to be self-source purpose so far. We talk about the bodybuilding or any of those things. Like, I'm at a point where they don't do anything for me beyond maybe just testing my limits. But even that, like, I feel like I've done it enough times that I'm not necessarily proving anything new to myself. I'm maybe in that sense, I'm just addicted to doing hard things. But I do desperately crave outsource purpose, especially in work and money, because I gamify money so much, but to what end?
Mm-hmm.
Like, more money doesn't do anything for me right now.
Yeah, and I think that's like the pitfall that a lot of people fall into. Like you see so many people throw out the claims of, oh, money doesn't buy happiness. I got I finally got the money that I wanted forever, and it didn't fix my fulfillment issues and stuff. And it's because they strived for those things with self-source purpose. They had selfish reasons in mind when they went out and got those things. Because again, like, self-source purpose is a very finite resource, and it'll eventually run out because, like you said, like, to what end, versus when you're doing those things with the mindset of, oh, this will affect something bigger than myself. That is an infinite resource. You can always be contributing to something larger than yourself.
Yeah, that's great. Moving forward, I'm interested in your perspective on this because I think we might have a little bit different of a take on this. Putting yourself around successful people.
I think it's great. I think it's necessary. I mean, related to sports, I mean, me and you both come from a sports background, and anyone who's played sports, we all know that if you put yourself in a position where you're the worst person on the field, on the court, you elevate your level of play. I come from a tennis background. I played tennis collegiately, and I've been in plenty of situations where I played people much better than myself, and every single time, my level of play was very elevated comparatively to what I probably know, comparative to, like, my baseline, if you will. You almost, like, force yourself to rise to the occasion, and the more you surround yourself with successful people, you will, the same thing applies, that you will elevate yourself in a way that I don't think you could do if you were around other people who were equal to you or lesser than you.
Yeah, I personally would. I feel like I would attribute nearly all of my success to being around successful people. And I'm curious on your take on it because I know that maybe there's a world in which you can say, like, either way you would find success. Maybe it just changes the timeline. Yeah. But I do think that being around successful people, and maybe it is just a timeline shift, but it's definitely the fastest way.
Oh yeah, it changes your timeline completely. When I moved to Chicago and I got connected with, the people that we share the studio with, I wouldn't be halfway near as close to where I am now if it wasn't for them, I don't think. I like to think that I would have figured it out, and I probably would. But it's just like a way to leapfrog because you can learn so much so quickly, because you can learn from people's mistakes and you can see where people went wrong. You can see, you can get to see their timelines. You can see how old they are. You can see when they started, and you can see how long it took them, and you can see why it took them that long, and you can leapfrog a lot of those issues. Honestly, it's kind of a cheat code in that way. The faster you can surround yourself with people who are better than you, you'll elevate yourself, elevate your play, and again, be able to kind of leapfrog in that way.
I want to give practical advice here because we both have done it, and this might sound easier than actually doing it, but we both moved across the country to surround ourselves with people that were more successful. How do you go about that? And because, for example, our friend Eric, the guy that we both moved here and worked for in the beginning, he is someone that has built a very successful online presence and turned into business and everything. And he has plenty of people that want to work for him, but only so many people get the opportunity. And I think that we should discuss how you go about that, how you provide value to someone that's provide value that they can't say no to, and kind of like putting your ego to the side. Because if you're in this place where you want to get better, you have to put your pride to the side and admit that, yeah, this person is way better and more knowledgeable about said thing, and I will give them my time for free in return for their knowledge. So how did you go about that?
Well, I think the first thing is that I feel like when it comes to networking, I feel like a lot of people try to play this weird game of trying to dance around the reason why they're networking in the first place. I feel like people try to play this game of, oh, like I want to be your friend, like, oh, I'm just worried about being friends with you. Like they try to act like they don't want anything in return. They try to play this whole like super innocent, like, oh, I have no intentions here. I just want to know you, just whatever. Like, no, we network for a specific reason because the person that we're trying to network with either has information or resources that we need, right? And so just be honest about that with yourself and with them. I think pretty much all relationships are transactional to a degree, right? And not being naive to that transaction. So what that looks like practically was when I moved up here, and it wasn't just Eric, all the people that we networked with and all the people that we share the studio with now and like our friends now, is I was aware of the fact that these people had things that I needed. So what did I do? I was a good person and I treated them well and I was a friend to them in a way. I showed up when they asked me to show up. I did things when they asked me to do things. I went out of my way to do things for them. I provided value, but I did all those things knowing that in return I would get the information or resources that I need. When you play that game of, oh, like I'm just trying to be friends with you, like I'm not trying to get anything out of you. You put yourself in a weird position where you then position yourself where you cannot provide value, right? Because let's be honest, you just being friends with someone isn't really providing them value. If there's someone out there who has an information or resource that you need, they probably actually don't benefit from being friends with you because you don't have anything, right? So you have to position yourself in a way that it's expected and it's reasonable for you to provide value, right? You put yourself in a way of like, hey, like I'm trying to get here. You obviously have the information I need to get there. Let me do something for you so that I can earn it, right? I think it's, we talk about all the time of, it's not wrong to profit from certain things in life. You just have to make sure the offer is worth it, right? You have to make sure that your offer, your value is worthy of the profit. Same thing with networking. You have to make sure that your value is worthy of the transaction. It's worthy of them giving you the information. You just don't play that weird game of, oh, I'm just trying to be friends. Oh, like I'm not trying to get anything out of you. Like I just want to be near you. I think that's weird. And I think it's just playing a game that you don't need to play. Did you do that as well? Or did you have kind of like a different approach?
I think that it's funny. I haven't reflected on this at this level, but I do think that definitely in the beginning, when I got connected with Eric, I didn't expect anything out of it, which is interesting because I'm going to give a completely like in contrast to what you said, but I I was under the impression of knowing this person in general is going to improve my life because I know that they've done the thing that I want to do. And I wasn't looking at it from like when I met Eric, my mind was not going to, oh, I need to work for this guy.
Well, yeah, like and like mine didn't either, but I knew that he had information that I needed in order to be successful. Like, did you not think that? Did you just think that by knowing him, like magical things were going to happen?
I'm not sure. I think that the reason why it worked for me was because I I mean, maybe this isn't the case, but my process of building my relationship with Eric was a progression over time. Yeah. And I like this is in complete contrast to what you were saying, but like I did just approach him from the sense of wanting to be friends with him. And then eventually it slowly worked its way into he saw the work ethic that I had just through conversation, not from mentor mentee, but just from person to person. And he's not ignorant to the fact that he's in a position where he can mentor someone like me and where I was especially. But I think that maybe it did benefit that I wasn't coming out asking for help, but provided value in the beginning.
Yeah, so like you still kind of did the thing. You just kind of did it a little bit more probably unknowingly in a way. Like you still provided value up front. You provided something that was worthy of the transaction.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because, and we were talking about this yesterday, and I hate to remove all agency from myself, but specifically when it comes to Eric and moving to Chicago and working for him and building that relationship, it does feel like a lot of those things just happened and they just like fell in line, which isn't helpful in terms of giving advice because we're telling people that they have a decision to make and they can control their outcomes. But I don't think that you have to approach every relationship from this is the end goal out of it and here's how I'm going to get there, because it naturally unfolded for me.
Yeah, like you can do the thing even unknowingly. I just think not playing the game of that makes things happen a lot faster, right? You know, the connections that I made and the information I was able to get coming here, I got it twice, if not three times as fast than probably other people would. You know, within 6 months of living here, I pretty much got the information that I needed. You know, like I'm always learning and I'm always gathering more information and I'm always, bettering myself and stuff. But basically the information that I moved here to get and the resources that I came here to get, I received within 6 months because I was just open about the fact that, hey, like I need these things. Here's what I can provide in order for you to give me those things. And, and I do think like a super important part of this, I'm not sitting here saying that you don't need to be friends with these people. You don't need to be, whatever. Like you need to be a good human. I think being a good human is paramount to this. Treating people well, being respectful of their time, being respectful of their feelings, treating them well and like being a friend. Part of this process is being a friend. I just don't think that that's the end all be all. It's just be their friend and hope that they give you something, right? Because if anything, I almost feel like that's more slimy because that's not super genuine in a way because that's even more transactional. Like, oh, I'm going to be your friend just so you will give me this thing, hopefully, right? Because then you're just playing this like weird waiting game of like, okay, like I'm your friend now. Like, when are you going to drop the info? Like, when are you going to give me the thing? Versus if you're transparent up front, at least you're respectful with their time, So yeah, you still have to be a good human. But, like kind of like to your point about, you feel like things kind of like unfolded a little bit more. Like I said, you can still kind of unknowingly do the thing. You know, the process still works. You know, you provided value up front. You preemptively messaged Eric and asked, you know, hey, like, I'll come shoot for you. Like, I'll come do this. You know, it's easy to say, if you're an outfielder and the ball's hit to you, it's easy to say, oh, well, like, the baseball was hit to me, and that's why I caught it. In reality, you still had to run underneath it. You know, you still had to put yourself in the position to receive whatever it is. So, I think it's easy to kind of, like, from your point of view, to remove agency from the equation, when in reality there was still plenty of agency at play. It might just not have played out exactly the way that you thought it should have been. You know, people think that it has to look a certain way in order for it to be the thing. You know, people think with networking it has to be this, oh yeah, like, I showed up at his doorstep at 5 a.m. and, you know, brought him coffee and begged him for a job and all that stuff. Or, you know, or people will bring out crazy stories. You know, honestly, like, I have a pretty interesting story in which that the way that I actually got Eric's attention was the fact that every YouTube video that he posted, I was the first one to comment. You can go back, you can fact check me on this. If you look at every YouTube video that Eric posted from the dates of, say, I don't know, like January of 2020, basically for almost an entire year, from January 2020 to January of 21, if not longer, maybe basically until I moved here, so maybe a year and a half, I was the first comment on every single video. And not only was I the first comment on every single video, I made sure to comment something that was, like, funny, eye-catching, like something that he would respond to. And, like, what happened? He knew me as the comment guy. He knew me as, like, he came to know me that way. And that led to an eventual, you know, work relationship and all that stuff. And so, yeah, that's a pretty interesting story, but it also doesn't have to look that way specifically. You know, it doesn't have to be this crazy, weird thing where you went out of your way to do something super special. It could be as simple as, oh, you just messaged him and asked him if he needed someone to shoot the marathon, and he said yes, right? Like, both of those still require agency.
I think that, to that point, if we're talking about people that undoubtedly have plenty of people with those offers, you do have to approach it uniquely.
Yeah.
Because actually how Eric and I got connected was at a film festival or a film premiere that I bought a ticket to, flew from Florida to Chicago just to see this film and meet Eric and the director of the film. And when I met Eric, and this wasn't planned, it just kind of was like a natural occurrence, but I knew that he was into running, and I asked him to run.
Yeah.
And he has told me since then that there was other people that same night that were like, hey, do you want to come out to North Ave and do a shoot? And he's like, no. And so I think that finding a unique way to actually, like, play to their interests, yeah, and find that commonality, because there's no doubt in my mind that if I didn't ask him to go for a run, I wouldn't be here right now. Yeah. So I think that you do need to find a unique approach and set yourself apart. But it also doesn't have to be this, like, super annoying.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be this, like, super crazy scenario in which you know, went out of your way to do a very hyper-specific X, Y, and Z, you know, because it's easy to, you know, discredit yourself in a way that you didn't do something super insane and it just kind of happened. Like, no, like, you still had agency and you still had to do the thing. You know, I'm thinking of that Luke Belmar clip where he's like, what I do? Duty freaking free. Johnny Walker Blue, sipping Johnny Walker Blue in the war room with Tristan Tate. You know, he talked about, like, doing his homework and stuff. And obviously that clip is such a meme. But I mean, like, there's still merit to it that, you know, do your homework, provide value, and it'll happen.
Cool. Moving forward, do you have another habit that you want to talk about?
I think it's your turn.
Okay. I was watching Hormozy on Iced Coffee Hour this morning, and it made me think about this. And this is something that I desperately am and need to work on, and it's having extreme efficiency. I think that when we look at the most successful people, they have a really good skill of removing distractions and having a clear tunnel vision of, like, this is the goal, this is what it takes to get there, and when you're in when you're that convicted a of a purpose, it's easy to push the social media, all the other distractions aside. But I think that that's a habit that people have to work on, because I know for myself, I struggle with getting distracted easily and being super efficient.
Yeah.
And what could be a 6-hour workday of super dialed work is a 10-hour workday of not. So how do you feel about that? Are you happy with your efficiency?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like, it took me a while to figure out what that looked like for me. If you don't know, I am incredibly ADHD. I got diagnosed when I was a little kid, and it's just been something that I've dealt with my entire life. As a kid, I wasn't even allowed to like get medicated for it. My mom said I was too intelligent for it. It's just like one of those things that she was like, "You got to figure it out. Like, we're not doing this." And I really appreciate that, and I'm really grateful that my parents took that route, because obviously, when you have ADHD, it looks different than probably like people without ADHD. But if you figure out a way to work around it and use it to your advantage, it's a superpower, honestly. So I just kind of, I just don't beat myself up over tangents in a way. Like, I kind of just like allow myself to be hyper obsessive about certain things. I'm a very hyper obsessive person, and I just like fixate on something. And I kind of just like go with it. Is my efficiency perfect? No. But I think people can also beat themselves up so much over not having super optimized efficiency that it ends up making things even more non-efficient. That makes sense. You get so caught up in this negative feedback loop of, oh, I didn't get enough work done today, that you end up just like feeling bad about yourself, and then you never actually get the thing done, right? But I'm more curious. I mean, like, again, like, efficiency for me is super simple. I'm super ADHD. I'm super hyper obsessive. I just roll with it. I just see it out to the end, and then I move on to the next thing. But I'm super interested how that plays out for you, because we were talking about experimentation styles yesterday, and how I'm someone who kind of just like goes all in on something and just like runs with it to see if it works, versus you like to kind of poke and prod and be a little bit more slow and methodical. How do you think that plays into this efficiency thing? Because you could make the argument that by not committing to something fully could slow you down. But you could also make the argument against kind of like the way that I do things, that like going all in too quickly on something could, provide its own set of dangers. How do you think that plays out? Because you said you were trying to work on efficiency.
Yeah, I think that my my slow approach to experimentation is definitely more in the ends of like work and maybe like positive direction.
Yeah.
But I'm the opposite in terms of negative aspects. I'm the like cut things cold turkey type of person. And an example of this was in high school. I got a hold of one too many delete social media videos and permanently deleted my Instagram account.
Wow.
Yeah. I had an Instagram account with over 1,000 followers, and I permanently deleted it off the app. And then spent the last 2 years of high school without social media. And so I've been trying to find a proper balance since then, because obviously with the work that we do, I can't not be on social media. So I have been experimenting with a number of different things I use in terms of social media and phone usage as the distraction. I use an app that shuts off access to social media apps. I have started, when we talk about in the morning not getting on your phone, I charge my phone outside of my room, put on Do Not Disturb, and that has been super helpful. I tried the like rubber band method, putting a rubber band on it to force yourself to think, what am I actually trying to use this for, instead of just the unaware habit of just grabbing it, picking up, and going on to Instagram. And the app that I use has definitely helped a lot, but I'm still finding myself going to extremes where I originally had it from 9 to 5, and it's an app where you have to go in and wait a certain amount of time to unlock all of your social media, and you can only unlock for up to 15 minutes, and you have to go back. but I switched it from 9 to 5 to from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Dang.
and just like not allowing myself to have
Yeah.
more than 15 minutes of time ever on social media. And so I'm trying to find where's the line between having all of these like boundaries that are not allowing me to get there, or do I just need to work on my like willpower
Yeah.
and not have that urge? So I'm trying to find that balance. I definitely am not as efficient as I want to be, and we actually have different perspectives on this, but I'm by far most efficient alone and in a very controlled environment, which doesn't lend itself super well to a co-working studio, which I've struggled with. But with that being said, I'm so appreciative of the space and it's done so much for me. So I'm trying to find that balance, whether that means working from home by myself in a controlled environment for the first half of the day, coming in, getting a few hours of more like social interaction, and then staying here later. That's definitely when I'm most efficient, is when I'm here at night by myself, no one else to talk to, not interested in shooting on the little basketball hoop and whatever. But yeah, I'm interested how you, because you're the opposite. You say that you are less efficient at home by yourself and more efficient here.
Yeah, I mean, part of it kind of goes back to that kind of just like blue collar mentality that I grew up with, where, you know, you wake up, you put your work clothes on, and you go to work. You know, when I'm at home, like I'm still in home mode. You know, I'm on the couch with my wife, I'm watching TV, I'm, you know, making breakfast, like I'm doing whatever. And it's so hard for me to get into work mode. But if I wake up and put my work clothes on and go to work, my mind switches and I'm at work, you know? And don't get me wrong, I still goof off plenty around here and, you know, we have fun, we talk, we, you know, do all those things. But part of it is also, it's easier for me to almost, you know, not only do I outsource my purpose, but I also outsource my work ethic in a way that I always do better when I'm working with other people, because part of me just like doesn't want to be annoying. You know, when, you know, my desk is right next to our friend Gene's, and when Gene puts his headphones on and he's dialed in, like I know it's also time for me to put my headphones on and also be dialed in, because I don't want to be the annoying guy who's still trying to talk to you while you got your headphones on and you're, you know, taking them off and all that stuff. Yeah, I thrive in those group environments a bit more, because when everyone else is working, it's also just easier for me to be working, if that makes sense. You know, there's plenty of times when I'm at home and I'm just like really struggling to get something done, and I'll literally just call my wife in there and be like, I need you to sit right here and just stare at what I'm doing and don't let me do anything else. And it just makes things so much easier for me, because I'm having someone else just hold the accountability for me so that I can actually focus on the work. Sometimes it's difficult for me to do the work and also hold myself accountable to do the work. You know, it's more easier for me to just focus on one thing, if that makes sense. So yeah, definitely different viewpoints on it. I mean, there's definitely times for me where I can lock in by myself and it's not a big deal. But it's more just like home specifically. Like if I went to a coffee shop, I don't have the issue. Or if I'm like in an airport or whatever, I don't really have the issue. It's specifically just like at home. But again, a lot of that just has to do with like, I'm at home. I don't think about work when I'm at home. I'm trying to be at home, you know?
Yeah. And what I'm trying to find the balance of, and I'm sure that you are too, is like not requiring this perfect scenario to get work done, but being effective and efficient in different environments, and acknowledging that there's going to be times where you're more efficient and more dialed in. But a lot of times I find myself coming into the studio, let's say at 11, and people are going to leave by 3. And for those 4 hours, I just discount work. I'm like, yeah, nothing's going to get done for the next 4 hours until everyone's gone. And that's just not working. So definitely a work in progress. But I wanted to bring that up because I do think that highly successful people are very efficient and pretty dialed. Do you have another habit? I have plenty more, but
I think we kind of combined two of mine, because they check themselves regularly and they talk to themselves. And we kind of talked about both of those at the same time. So I'm kind of out.
okay. So the next one that I have is, and we've talked about this in more detail on an individual episode, but removing their correlation of their time to making money. Highly successful people find a way to scale to the point where it's not their time in return for money, but they build something that can be self-sufficient. How do you see this, or I guess, how are you trying to find this in your own life?
I mean, yeah, it's, it kind of goes back to that whole, we've talked about learning how to say no, learning that you're no longer the hard work guy, you're the ideas guy. And I think that just kind of just goes hand in hand with it, is that for a long time, we just conflagrate hard work with doing the thing. We conflagrate hours equal to money. When there's going to come a time when you have to transition out of that. You have to transition to, understanding that you're no longer the guy that rows the boat. You're the guy who steers the boat, right? When it comes to money, yeah, you have to start approaching everything from less of a time perspective and more so as a, dang, this one's hard. I feel like I was just like saying nonsense right there.
I'm in it right now. So basically every dollar I make is due to my time that I put in. And to be completely transparent, I don't think that there's necessarily, until you're have built a massive business, there's not necessarily a time where it's not time for money. I think that the amount of time just looks different. So in a more clear example, if you're someone who sells a digital product online, you do upfront work and then you have this evergreen product that can be sold and there's no cap on it, versus doing an 8-hour workday for X rate of money. So that's the difference. For transparency, your business is a little bit more optimized than mine in terms of not being as time required, but in general, we're building this as a way to, we see this as a much clearer step forward than the businesses that we currently have to do that thing. With the example of this podcast, how do you imagine our time not being directly in correlation with money that it can earn?
Yeah, of course, outside of everything still requires some level of time commitment, right? I don't think there's anything that's there's no such thing as truly passive income. Everything requires some sort of time commitment. You just want to make sure that the ratio is favored to the money side and not to the time side, right? If your ratio is extreme amounts of time for small amounts of money, things are messed up, right? Ideally you want time to be small and the money to be large. So for this show, for example, I've done a fairly good job of building my own personal business to be pretty hands-off in a way that, my ratio is pretty good on my business currently of time to money ratio. But, me and you have both talked about how we wanted something that was even less time intensive in a way that we can, scale a business that allows us to be more flexible. So that's why we, started the show, is that we wanted something that was a bit more online based, less in-person based. We wanted something that allows us to do things kind of on our schedule. I think people discount the fact that by you being able to do things whenever you want to also saves you time. For example, in our business, we run service-based businesses. We have to show up for a shoot at a very specific time on a very specific date, and we have to make our schedules around that shoot versus when we're able to film the podcast, we can do it basically whenever we want to. We have our set times and stuff, but, if I text them hey, we really need to film on Thursday instead of Wednesday, we can do that. And that in and of itself saves you time, and that makes that time ratio smaller. And I think people tend to discount that. So that was probably one of the biggest reasons, was that we would have a business that we can work on truly whenever we want to. We don't have to be on certain things at certain dates always. We don't have to respond to certain people at a certain time always. We don't have to delegate this task and that task, at a specific time every day. We don't have to do all these tasks that are time sensitive. We can kind of go at our own pace, at our own schedule. So that's kind of where I saw the podcast going, and that's where I see it being, and ultimately why we started it.
Yeah, and also in reference to the podcast, we're not naive to the fact that something online takes a lot of upfront work and time to make profitable. And there's also something to be said about the amount of passion that you have in it. So it's very clear that both your business and my business currently are more worth our time to pour into than this podcast. But if it's not what we're passionate about, then it's to what end?
Yeah. But I mean, also, it's also a difficult balance of also understanding that to build anything is going to require sacrifice. And you gotta, it might not be worth the time investment now, but it will be later. It's not worth your time now, but the investment is worth your time. You got to kind of stack those hours over and over and over, and eventually they will pay off. Because, just like anything else, when you're investing in the S&P, when you start buying into it right now, I mean, well, not right now. Now's not a great time because the market is awful right now. But regardless, when you first start buying into a stock, your cost average ratio isn't great, right? Because you only have, the baseline to build your ratio off of, and you can say it's not technically worth your dollars. Like all the money you've put into it hasn't really benefited you at all. But over time, you keep putting those dollars into the S&P. The S&P continues to do its annual percentage returns, 8%, 10%, whatever the S&P actually does. Over time, that average cost ratio will improve, right? It's the same principle. When you first start out with a project, whatever business you're building, whatever you're doing, it might not be worth it in that moment, technically, from like a ratio and numbers perspective. But if you keep stacking over time, that ratio will shift. It just takes time.
It's a beautiful transition into my last point, and where I think we will disagree the most, and I'm excited to get into it, is financial literacy. And also, just to clarify, this is not financial advice what I'm about to say, but it's actually a great time to buy S&P 500.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely.
Right, you buy when it's low.
Yeah.
Either way, we have very different takes on financial literacy, and I want to hear your take on how important it is as a successful person to have financial literacy.
Oh, I think it's absolutely important. I think we both can agree on that. I think financial literacy is super important. And it's something, and I've said this before, I wish I had financial literacy earlier in my life. I wish I would have known what to do with money. I wish, I didn't use the excuse that I didn't know about money, as an excuse to do the things that I've done previously, of just like being so passive with money and just so like, oh, whatever. I just think people also discount the merit of the ability to make more money. I think there's a balance. I think people try to instill this like super scarcity mindset of money is extremely fleeting and you got to hold on to every dollar that comes through. When if you take that too far, then you never develop the skill of actually making money. And, you can hold on to your dollars all you want, but they will slowly be taken away. It is not free to live. Everything costs money. So your dollars will eventually slip out of your hands. And if you don't have the skills necessary to make more of it, then you did all of that in vain, in my eyes. You just don't need to neglect the money making portion of that. And of course, like you can swing too hard that way as well. That's what I'm very guilty of, is that I just rely solely on my ability to make money, not my ability to hold on to money. So it's a difficult balance, but yeah, I think people tend to make too many decisions based on fear.
Do you think in your position specifically, will you, like, is now that time for you to actually make those changes in your personal finance journey?
Oh yeah, because truthfully, I make too much money to not be like, or I make too much money to be super just loosey goose with it, and just being super passive with it. It would be incredibly stupid on my end to be making the amount of money that I do and not know where it all goes and know what it's doing for me. And I'm at the point now where I probably need to start making sure my money is working for me. It's not just allowing me to gain access to things, but it's also actively working for me. Um, it's something I think about a lot and something that I'm actively working on. It's one of the big things that I wanted to work on this year was having my finances super, super dialed because again, like in the past, I've pretty much only relied on my ability to make more money.
I know that in the past you've said that, and you've been hesitant to invest properly, like let's say a Roth, because you'd rather have that money available for future potential business ventures, things like that. How do you feel about that right now?
Um, I kind of have two parts of me to this. I think there's a part of me that's more valid if you applied it to earlier in life, like to where I was probably like 3-4 years ago, which is so kind of like my hot take here on this part of me is that I don't think a Roth is at the top of your list. If you do not have the skills necessary to make money, a Roth is not going to save you, right? If you aren't building something sustainable for the long term, a Roth isn't going to save you. And a Roth is one thing, but I think that kind of goes for investments as a whole. You could even go so far as to say, you know, outside of an emergency fund, I would be very hesitant to like be putting so many dollars into a savings account as well. Because the way that I look at it is that I like going back to the Roth, you don't access your Roth until you're what, 60 something, 65? I don't know the exact age. But I think putting all of your hopes and dreams into a Roth to save you is incredibly negligent because you have, 40 years between, the ages of 20 and, 65 or whatever, right? And if you're not making money and if you're not building something sustainable, like, do you really want to be doing all this work of maxing out your Roth every year and like that's your top priority in your life to then only enjoy it when you're 65? Like that just doesn't make sense to me. All these people just like put all this money away, put all this money away, put all this money away for a rainy day, and you just don't ever define what that rainy day is, and then you just never lived. You know, I'm just very cognizant of the fact that life is very fleeting. Life can end very quickly, and one thing I'm not going to do is just try to play this ultra safe game so that I can quote unquote retire when I care much more about years 20 through 60 than I do 61 through 80, truthfully. Some people can make the argument that maybe that's a bit selfish because if you don't put yourself in a position to retire, then, you have to rely on your kids to take care of you and stuff. But I think if you build something worth building in the years 20 through 60, that will sustain you 60 through 80. Like, I'm not saying that don't be financially literate and don't put money away and don't prepare. But at the same time, I'm not interested in just working and putting money away so that I can eventually enjoy my money when I'm 65. I'd rather work really hard now and really develop the skills to make money and enjoy my money ages 25 through 60, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the the argument here is that financial literacy is important, and because you didn't have financial literacy, you delayed that window too far. Because you objectively, at least last year, made enough money that you could invest in a Roth. You could max it out and it wouldn't have hurt.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the other part that I didn't get to, and I probably should have, was that there is another part of me that I think is more valid that applies to me now, which is I should be able to, and this applies kind of specifically to a Roth, of which I should be able to do both. I should be able to be, um, I should be able to leverage my money to do things that I want to do and to be kind of aggressive with it, and also be able to max out a Roth in a year and it not affect me, right? I should, now at this point in life, I should be able to do both and neither affect me. Um, but, again, I think it applies more to when you're in those beginning stages. And I just don't think a Roth is at the top of the priority list. But now I do agree that I should be able to do both and it not affect me as much as it did, years ago.
Yeah. I think that the balance is having financial literacy doesn't mean that you necessarily have to apply said knowledge right away. Because if you just, because it's not applicable right now, you just discount it altogether, then you're going to delay the process even further.
Yeah. Yeah, no, again, I have definitely not had the best financial literacy in the past, right? It's something I'm working on. I just hate it when people discount the fact that making money and the skill of making money is a part of financial literacy. Financial literacy is more than just high yield savings accounts and Roth IRAs and S&P 500s and this, that, and the other. It's also finding solutions to problems. It's upselling. It's marketing. It's making money overall.
So are you going to let me audit your finances?
We should do that eventually, I think. I do think this is probably a good transition into kind of like the last thing that I have on my list here. And I think this ties into financial literacy, and it also ties into what we were just talking about earlier, about efficiency and stuff, which is being able to approach every problem and everything in your life from a big picture perspective. When I was younger, I watched a lot of Gary Vee content, and Gary Vee always talked about the macro and the micro, what's appropriate to do in the micro and what's appropriate to do in the macro, and Gary always talked about how you always have so much more time than what you think, right? He's like, you're 35, you're a kid, like you're a baby, you haven't even gotten started yet, something that I think I do a really good job of. And, I think we do have slightly differing perspectives on this, is that I approach everything from a super big picture perspective. When I'm building a project, I'm someone who's very kind of all in on something. But I'm all in a big picture, let me explain this better. I am someone who goes all in on things, but I go all in on what I would consider the micro, but I'm multitasking in the macro. What I mean by that is, take this podcast, for example. I'm giving this podcast everything I got in what I would consider the micro. So that means for the next 6 months, this podcast is going to get 110% of my abilities to make it good, right? But I look at that as, okay, 6 months for the rest of my life. So for me, 6 months is the micro. The macro is 10 years. Over the course of these 10 years, I'm actually multitasking, where I've worked on several different projects and I've poured myself into a multitude of things, and I've poked and I've prodded and I've tried a bunch of things over the next 10 years. But for the next 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, I'm going to give this one thing everything I got, and the ability to think on a bigger picture and a longer scale. And I think this kind of ties into a lot of the things we talked about, like labeling your seasons and stuff, like understanding that, things take time, but also the time that it takes isn't as much as you think it is. 6 months for the rest of your life is not a lot of time. If you took 6 months and on the other side of that 6 months, you had the chance to completely change your life forever, that's nothing. The trade-off cost there, in my opinion, is nothing, So I kind of view what probably a lot of people would consider long amounts of time is I actually consider those short amounts of time, and I consider those the micro, I'm curious because I talked about this earlier with how me and you kind of have different experimentation styles, and, you're definitely much more of a slow, methodical thinker. Where do you think big picture thinking applies to you and like how you're going about things?
I think that we both have big picture goals and are aligned on them.
Yeah.
In specific to the podcast or any other business venture, I think that this actually is just due to my natural tendency to be more pessimistic. And I think that you're a more optimistic person and see all the potential upside of something, and I see all the potential failures of something.
Yeah.
And that has forced me. It's something that I've tried. Like, I've really tried to improve on, and I just like am naturally that way. I see what could go wrong. And so I like how I see myself getting to the big picture is a slow burn. Whereas I think that you're more of like you just said, it's 6 months for the rest of your life. I like in that situation, I would be lying to myself if I said that I fully believed that there were things that you could put 6 months into 110% and guarantee the rest of your life be changed. So because of that, I take a more methodical approach. I apply myself to a multitude of things. I know that there's moments in life that happen where there's big growth because of certain decisions. I know that from me moving from Florida to Chicago and then 3xing my income in that year, that was one of those moments. And there's going to be more moments in the next 10 years. But I'm not the type of person that's like actively looking for them to happen right now. But rather, I take the approach that I'm doing all of the right things. I have my personal finances in check. I'm surrounding myself with the right people. I'm constantly progressing in skills. Things will come, and maybe that's just like a difference in
But
agency.
to kind of play devil's advocate here, wouldn't you want to have more agency in that equation? Wouldn't you want to be more in control of the thing and also want the thing to happen sooner? Like if you could make your 10-year goal happen in the next year, like would you not want that?
I think it's not about whether I want it or not. I think it's about whether, in terms of the optimism and pessimism, like whether I believe that that is possible or not.
You know, I think that's also interesting that you bring that up because I actually identify very much as not an optimistic person. I think something that I've worked on for years is I'm naturally a very cynical person in particular. Instead of like the optimist and pessimistic thing, I'm very much just cynical. I'm someone who always tries to find the ridiculous thing in something. I try to find the negative thing in it. And I try to, it's just like, I'm always the person to be like, oh, like that's so stupid. That's like my knee-jerk reaction to everything. And I think what that's kind of allowed me to do is almost use that in an ability to stress test things and be able to poke holes in whatever I'm doing at the time. Like being able to be very cynical about stuff, I'm able to use that mentality on whatever I'm doing, and I can try to see whatever it is that's so whatever that is so incredibly stupid about what I'm doing currently, and be able to then find solution for the potential potholes that'll happen. And that almost just allows me to be more confident in whatever I'm doing because I already see what the potential pitfalls will be and be able to navigate around those currently. But again, I guess I just struggle with the whole, we talked about this the other day of you feel like things kind of happen to you a bit more, whereas I feel like I made everything happen. I'm trying to just like kind of understand that viewpoint more because it's just so foreign to me because I'm such a high agency person. I just, I see something I want it, I go get it. How do you navigate though? Like how does that, like, do you ever think about, or does that make you worry at all that you're doing all the right things and it'll just happen?
I think that I have very high agency in nearly every aspect of my life, except for specifically like business, I guess. But because everything else is very high agency and in control, I feel like business has just happened.
You just kind of control all the other contributing factors, and because you
Like,
control, yeah,
it's undeniable that I have very high agency with fitness
yeah,
and health.
absolutely.
Same thing with personal finance. Those things are dialed, but I don't have that same control in business. I mean, like, even my business as it stands is a lot more of a freelancing than like, it's a lot more of a freelancing business than it is a specific, I guess, genre.
Yeah.
So I guess I haven't yet felt super high agency in business, but things have still worked out. So
But and then kind of going back to the kind of the timeline thing of, you have hesitancies around like the mentality of like 6 months for the rest of your life thing. Do you not configurate it to the same as like, you lift a lot, you know that if you go to the gym every day and lift for 6 months, you know that on the other side of that 6 months, there will be changes to your body compositionally. Like, muscle will be built. You will change. Do you not think the same way with business though?
I think that when I think about the gym though, I don't think about the 6 month difference. I think about the 10-year difference. There is a 6 month difference, but after that like initial phase, then to get anything extra out of it, you have to multiply by 10 the amount of time.
Sure.
And that's how I feel the same way. I apply that to everything. Like I'm also a very hesitant person to like get rich quick type things. And I've like completely turned myself off to any of those things. And because of that, I subscribe to, as long as I am continuing to evolve in business and not be afraid of new opportunities and continue to say yes to things that interest me, I know that my interests and just my natural tendency to want to grow and succeed financially and all those things will lead me in the right direction. But yeah, I think we're just
Yeah, we're just like
different.
completely like on the different spectrum, because I also just, I just have this mindset of, if I do something and I do it well and I do it for a period of time and I give it the amount of attention necessary, like, it will happen. Because I look around and I see other people do it, and I just don't understand the argument as to why I couldn't do it either. You know, I definitely don't believe in get rich quick schemes. Building, like, there's a difference between getting rich and building wealth, right? But I also think people think that you have to give things exorbitantly amounts of time in order for them to happen, in order for it to be real. Like, I don't think that you have to do this thing where you grind for 10 years just to then get on the other side and finally build something. I think now with the state of the internet, the state of culture, the state of society, the amount of tools that we have to leverage, the long-term 5-10 year thing probably was more applicable 5, 10, 15 years ago. But I think now, with everything that's at your disposal, I just don't see a reason as to why you can't build something that's great in a smaller amount of time. Like, you have so many tools at your disposal to make something happen in a short amount of time, right? We hear stories about this all the time. We follow this fitness influencer who has like an online coaching business, and he built it from 0 to 6 figures in 6 months, right? And I also see that in my own life. We talked about this in my personal episode where Cyrus interviewed me. I moved to Chicago with $100 to my name, essentially. I turned that into 6 figures within a year and a half. I moved here in June. I, did my 6 months of, working different things here and there. And then my first full year of fully freelance, I made $75,000. And then my second year of full-time freelance, I made over 6 figures, right? So a year and a half, essentially, right? Is that math? No, 2.5 years. Within a short amount of time, starting from nothing, made it happen. Like it happened, right? I did the 6-figure thing in a short amount of time, comparatively, especially starting from nothing. So starting for where I am now, currently, now my business is the best it's ever been. I have all the capital and tools necessary to build something else. Why can't I do the same thing again, but with all the skills and knowledge that I have now? Why can't it happen in an even shorter amount of time? It's kind of just like where I come from with it, like why can't it?
I feel like although things have happened fast in different aspects of my life, I'm I think that where the disconnect is potentially is like my but I don't want to say it's a disconnect because I know you're the same way, but the standard is putting a lot of effort into something. So like I struggle with being like, oh, for these 6 months, putting a lot of effort into this thing is going to change something. As if on the other end of those 6 months, the amount of work is going to be different. Because that thing will still require the same amount of work to continue on. Sure. So I don't set short times as like, oh, from here to there, there's going to be a change. Because I know that it's still going to have to continue on. So like I apply the mindset of, I'm just going to work hard. And like, yeah, you change what you're working on, and that's fine. And you put your energy in different areas. But I guess it's just my way of coping with not being so all or nothing to make myself feel like still comfortable in the scenario. But I think that there's a world in which we could be saying a similar amount of effort. I don't know.
Because like, don't you think at some point you do have to pick something?
But I think that like signs will show which
thing to pick. Based on what though? Because I feel like in order to see those signs, like you have to do the thing.
But I think that you can do multiple things.
You can do multiple things at once.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think people underestimate their ability to multitask as well. But yeah, I guess it's just like a, kind of like what you said about like maybe it is optimism. Maybe you call that optimism. I just don't see a world in which I apply myself to something for 6 months and it not be good. And you don't see some sort of sign of life and sign of traction and sign of keep going, right? It's interesting though. And I think either way though, like to kind of wrap all this up, like you have to still have that mentality of big picture. You can't expect to do things in a week. You can't expect to do things in a day. And you can't make too short term of decisions either. You can't make decisions you can't make decisions to affect a week from you now. Like you have to make decisions that will affect you 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I mean, ultimately, like we're all working towards the same thing of wanting to build a better life, and you can only build that better life if you're making those long-term decisions.
Yeah. So that was 10 habits of highly successful people. Like we said in the beginning, these aren't necessarily the 10 habits that you have to be successful. These are just things that we've found both in successful people that we know and look up to, and ourselves, and what we are applying currently in our lives. And if any of this was helpful, leave a comment, subscribe, follow, whatever platform you're watching this on. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next one.